different administrations and leadership at the agency. But I'm sure the same pitfalls that we ran into after 9/11, we're seeing now come back to bite us as, Russia becomes the top priority. But lying in the weeds, lying in waiting are these terrorist enemies. Because again, they're not only, by the way, going underground, but they're watching and analyzing everything that we do. And you spoke to something about, the tradecraft the likes of Zarqawi would implement. A lot of that came from what he learned from our open source. So, the media has a big role in exposing our work sometimes as well. And I think we take for granted that, it's just domestically consumed by an American audience, but that's not the case. I questioned, interrogated a lot of guys I was in a lot of interrogations, at least, where these questions would come up, and they told us, yeah, we're reading your papers, we're watching your TV programs, we're, monitoring your news, and they're learning a lot just from that. So that's a scary revelation as well.
That's wild. Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think the public ever would have guessed that they're following what we see here in the news or Wikipedia or whatever you could read online to get kind of whatever edge they might need. I do want to talk now about when you're on the ground, and I know we talked briefly off camera that you had some cross paths with some tier 1 operators during your time in the CIA. As an outside person who watches what they do and works with them, but is not part of Delta Force Team 6, what is your impression of tier 1 operators as someone who sees them but is not part of them?
I think they're probably, in terms of skill set, the most well-rounded people in the U.S. government and probably in our entire country. They I think in the movies a lot, when going back, I might be dating myself here for some of your audience, maybe not, but you go back to the Rambo movies and Commando and stuff like that, they're often portrayed as brawny knuckle draggers. And that's honestly, that's kind of how operators writ large, I think, are viewed by the likes of DC politicians often, but they're incredibly smart. I mean, I remember having a conversation with a SEAL team counterpart, and his knowledge of chemistry was, rivaled any PhD coming out of an Ivy League school. And that was from, his work and training. So that always struck me, based on the relationships that I had. And they tend to, when you're actually interacting with them, they use their brains over their brawn first. And I don't think they get the recognition for that as much as they should, for how smart those guys are. So yeah, we had a really good working relationship. There was a period when I was at CIA base in Baghdad, at the height of some pretty tense conflict. After things had kind of been a little calm for a while, it spiked back up one summer, and I was meeting with the Delta teams almost on a daily basis, and having those interactions. And I remember being in meetings with General Odierno at the time, who was commander for the ground in Iraq, following Petraeus. So we had a good relationship. But yeah, those guys are, I would put their brains above their brawn over pretty much anybody in our, definitely in our intelligence community, and our government as a whole. I mean, they're some of the smartest guys I've ever known.
That's a fascinating answer. I throw this question to everyone I interview who has any knowledge of the subject. It's a fun one. You can answer as much as you want or not, but okay. The viewers know what's coming. The best debate we have on this show is SEAL Team 6 versus Delta Force. As a CIA targeting officer, how would you compare and contrast those two, the two best direct action units in the U.S. military?
All right, let me caveat this, if I may. Professionally, most of my day-to-day, when I was embedded with the likes of a military unit, it was primarily with Delta Army Rangers. So because of that, I probably am more biased because I had those, direct relationships. Now, that being said, one of my first chiefs at the agency was a former SEAL team operator, and he was a no-nonsense leader, but also had a very compassionate side. So I'm going to bias toward the the Delta guys just because I had most of my day-to-day relationships, and there were some times when, my life probably depended on their prowess and ability, as maybe theirs did on mine. I don't know at the time. But yeah, I'll bias toward the Delta. But if you're a SEAL team guy, listening, that's not a knock on you. It's just I had more exposure when, in terms of the operations I conducted was mainly with the Delta guys through JSOC.
Very, very fair answer. That's a good answer.
Diplomatic answer. Am I ready for Congress? Okay.
Very diplomatic answer. All right. One of the things you always see, like you've been talking about the Mission Impossible movies, you've been talking about the Bourne movies with Matt Damon. All of those are very fun. A common theme in those movies, though, is there's a phone that goes off. Now we have 1 minute, or we got 10 minutes to save the world, or everything's going to blow up. Does stuff like that actually happen in the CIA, where the red phone goes off, and now we have to save the world and no one's going to know? Or is that just a Hollywood drama?
Look, man, if we only had 10 minutes to save the world, that means we've been piss poor at our job. Especially in this day and age with all of the technical tools we have in intelligence gathering. But I will say there have been times, it's not necessarily a save the world mentality, but there have been times when a target has quickly emerged and we have to circle the wagons like that. I've been a part of a few conversations, some by phone. I'll tell you one story. It was about 3 a.m. at Langley, and I had to follow a senior leader, or I had to track down a senior leader and found him in the men's room, and I had to brief him, and we had about not a little more than 10-minute window, but it was maybe a half-hour window at most to decide if we could conduct an operation. So that was fun. I was outside his stall briefing him while he was, conducting some business.
And did they pull the trigger on the operation?
Yeah, I think he was just eager to finish his business, so he gave a pretty quick approval. And it ended up being a good, it ended up being a successful objective.
In a situation like that where it's very fluid and, like you said, your time window at most is 10 to 30 minutes, you got someone at the phone at Langley, maybe you got someone on the ground. Is there someone at the White House that is also in these ongoing conversations, briefing the president in real time?
So there's at the time, and I'll caveat it then because, every administration can have a different process, and sometimes, new authorities and regulations are passed. But at the time, there was a baseline authority given to our leadership chain. And if it exceeded, there were some extenuating circumstances for certain high value targets, HVTs as we call them. So for instance, there were certain things that we would not do, or certain areas, certain conditions under which we would not conduct an operation for 99% of our targets.